How's it going, gentlemen? This mission example, we're going to make a paratrooper drop mission. So the idea is that some Ju-52s will be flying here. They'll fly over this Lapino airfield, drop off at least 5 paratroopers, and that will fire off a series of events, including a nice little ground war and all of the vehicles getting flipped over to the Axis side because we're capturing Lapino Air Base, and also giving the Axis pilots ability to take off from here if it was a multiplayer game. So let's go ahead and take a look at it in action. So here we are in our Ju-52, and let's switch to external view. And so what they need to do is take over this base. And you'll see fires here, and this is because I'm destroying Axis vehicles early in the mission. Players typically won't see this because they'll be flying to the objective, but because we're testing, it's there right away. So we should get our message here in just a second. Oh, there we go. Green light, jump now. So I'm pressing the bomb drop button to release some paratroopers here, and we'll go ahead and watch them fall. Such good animation. All right, so enough paratroopers have dropped, and so we'll have a little ground war going on. You can see now they're shooting at each other. Pretty cool, right? Pew, pew, pew. So we're gonna speed up time just a little bit to let this ground war continue, and I will switch to this. Let's see, there we go. And the paratroopers have successfully taken over the base, and when that happens, I destroy all of the um, allied objectives, and you can see that happening. And I spawn in all of the Axis objectives, all the Axis entities. All right, so let's take a look at how this works. So I'm going to shut this down, and we'll go into the mission itself. So you can see here we have our Ju-52 that I was flying. And what will happen is we'll enter this first circle here, which is going to be our check zone. This check zone enter will activate a complex trigger. That's this circle right here, right? And then once I'm in the complex trigger, I'll get that message that we saw where it says, hey, you have the green light, jump, 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 jump. And hopefully the player will release their paratroopers at the time, just like I did. Once enough paratroopers have jumped, then I fire off a series of events, which we saw the gunners shooting at each other and having like a little ground war, right? Because the paratroopers are capturing the base, and then the base gets flipped over. And of course, we're playing single player, so we don't get to see the airfield get flipped to from neutral to Axis, allowing the Axis pilots to use the airfield. But if it was a multiplayer mission, that totally would work. All right, so we're gonna move our little player back to its original spot, and we'll go inside this group and take a look at it. So here we have our check zone logic. So typically, complex triggers take up a lot of resources. So I don't want it enabled initially, right? During the mission, we don't want it enabled unless we need it. So the check zone does this for us. It enables it and disables it. So when the players enter this enter check zone area, right, then I enable the complex trigger. And when the players leave the check zone area, this outer rim, right, so the players are in this area, then I turn the check zone, sorry, not the check zone, the complex trigger off. So that's what this logic is right here. So let's say the player enters, right? So it pulses this gate, activates our complex trigger, and then the player enters the complex trigger. So once they enter the complex trigger, I have an event here. So let's take a look actually at our complex trigger. We have it disabled, pretty small radius. We're checking for planes, specifically the Ju-52, and specifically of countries on the German side. So I have 2 event filters. The first one is object entered alive, and this is just to let the player know that like, hey, you're in the right area, go ahead and drop troops. And in my case, I'm using a subtitle message, but you could use smoke, you could use explosions, you could do whatever, you could change icons, anything you want, right? And then I originally actually had paratroopers landed alive, but that wasn't working for me, so we're using paratroopers jumped as an event filter. So our first purple pulse goes to this one right here, and this is our on entered alive. So when the JU52 enters alive, then I pulse this gate, which immediately deactivates itself, and we just let our players know, like, hey, it's time to drop the paratroopers. I also pulse this 1 minute timer, so I'm sorry, 1.5 minute timer. So we're pulsing three things: this deactivate, this enter area subtitle message, and this 1.5 minute timer. So immediately the gate will deactivate itself because the deactivate fires back to the gate. And 1.5 minutes later, we pulse this activate to reactivate the gate message here. And that's because, let's say, the player enters the sphere and then gets killed. Well, no big deal. The player can enter again and we'll send that message again. But if the player is sort of like flying on the fence line here of our complex trigger sort of boundary area, then the message could potentially fire over and over and over and over and over, and it's going to be annoying to the players. So if that happens, we're going to fire it once every minute and a half. If the pilot is flying like along the edge of the boundary areas, we'll still only pulse it 1 minute and a half there. All right, so this is just sort of like feedback to the player. So when you make engaging gameplay, you really want to try your best to give the player as much feedback as possible. Let them know, hey, you're being successful or you're not being successful, so the player can immediately adjust and do what they need to do to complete the mission. Um, okay, so that's what that is. So then we have another I can't talk. Purple pulse, and that's going to be our on jumped, and we have it to this 5 counter. So the paratroopers actually have 12. I originally thought it was 8, but they have 12 paratroopers that can jump out of the JU-52. But I have it at 5. You can totally set this number to whatever you want, right? We can set it to 3, 1. We can set it to 24 if we want, right? So it's like 2 JU-52, full JU-52s, whatever number you want. And which in turn pulses this ground fire gate in, which is sort of an advanced topic. So we'll talk about that at the end here, because you really don't need this part. This is just fluff. Okay. So anyway, let's go back to our 5 counts. We have our 5 count that pulses this deactivate. This deactivate deactivates the complex trigger, because remember, we don't want it running if it doesn't need to be run, right? So boom, it's gone forever. And we pulse this gate right here, meaning that the check zones that normally turn the complex trigger on will no longer turn the complex trigger on, because this gate is now turned off, meaning that this activate will never get pulsed. All right, so that happens immediately after our 5 count. Then 2 seconds later, we notify the player again, right? We're giving feedback to the player. Hey, you know what? Enough paratroopers have jumped. And then 100 milliseconds after that, we deactivate our icon that says, hey, paratroopers need to be dropped in this area, to a new icon that says, hey, paratroopers have dropped and now the objective is captured. Good job. So this by itself is enough. And by the way, these two icons and the subtitle message, again, are feedback to the player to make really cool, engaging gameplay. So this by itself is all you need to make a really cool JU-52 pair dropping mission. This is the intermediate version of a mission type, right? Instead of kill X number of buildings or X number of tanks, this is sort of unique and special and a nice little one-off. That's all you need. But I did say there was sort of an advanced topic. So we have this ground fire gate in, and we also have another pulse to this series of stuff. All right. So let's go back to our ground fire gate in, and then we'll come to this other pulse that's off screen here. So we get our 5 paratroopers are jumped. It pulses this ground fire gate in. Now this ground fire gate in is really cool, because what it does is it enables, let's go into it, these 3 Axis machine guns and these 3 Allied machine guns. So the paratroopers jump out of the plane, and immediately we have like this ground war going on where machine gun fire is going off and stuff like that. The players who are flying in the air are going to be like, "Whoa, this is really cool. I see all this stuff getting shot at on the ground. I can tell that the paratroopers have definitely landed instead of the paratroopers just landing and then disappearing, right? So this, in my opinion, makes really cool and engaging gameplay. I have these command attack ground. So basically, this Axis machine gun nest is just going to attack the ground, and you notice it's just outside of the range of the Allied machine gun, and the Allied machine gun is going to do the same, right? It's just outside of the Axis machine gun, and so you just see this ground fire going on, and it just looks really cool to see that. Now, this ground fire will actually continue. So let's go back to our logic here. This ground fire will actually continue for a minute and a half, and that's where this next pulse comes in. So let me turn it back to black so we can take a look. So we were here, ground fire gate in, that turns on the ground fire, making it look really cool, having this like little ground war going on while the paratroopers are like floating in the air. And even when they land, it's still going to go on. So we have it set for a minute and a half. Of course, you can change this to whatever you want, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever. But I think a minute and a half is enough to let pilots who are over the area see this sort of ground war going on and be like, whoa, this is cool. I've never seen this before. So 1 minute time, 1.5 minute timer, and then that immediately turns off the ground fire. So you can see here, it's sending it to these green object links, and that's actually a deactivate that's in there. We can actually take a look. So let's take a look. So you can see deactivating all of the vehicle entities, and that in turn stops everything for the ground war. So a minute and a half, ground war is gone, and then 100 milliseconds later, we pulse destroy all allied entities. So remember, this was originally an allied base, and let me go to the static objects here so we can take a look. And I got some issues because I launched it I launched it while I was playing the game, but that's okay. There's definitely allied entities here, and there are also Axis entities, and then we have these three right here, are just like they're not unique. They're universal entities, right? They work for both Ally and Axis. So once enough paratroopers have landed and that ground war is done, I destroy all of the allied unique entities. So the I-16s, the IL-2s, and the allied box trucks, the flatbed trucks, and so on and so forth. I also destroy the universal entities as well. Then I convert any universal entities back to Axis because now the Axis team has captured the airfield. And I'm also converting Axis blocks back into Axis. And this will make sense in just a second. So now technically everything's destroyed and the Axis entities have been converted to Axis. Then I repair all of the Axis entities. So all of the Allied entities remain destroyed, but the Axis entities get repaired. And this is all happening very quickly, 100 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, and then 100 milliseconds, and then another 100 milliseconds. And I let the player know, give them some feedback. Hey, paratroopers have successfully taken over the base, and I remove this objective captured icon because it's been there for a minute and a half, and I convert this multiplayer respawn airfield to an Axis airfield. So we'll talk about that as well. Let's go back to our converting Allied and Axis stuff. So you can see here I'm converting all the Allied and all the Axis entities to become Axis, and I'm doing that with a behavior MCU, and I'm just flipping it, the country code from Allied or USSR or USA or whatever to Germany. So the reason I'm doing that is because when we go to our static objects here, so let's go and look at them. On mission begin, actually, I want to go to the Axis ones. So on mission begin, you'll see here that the Axis ones are actually set to ally. Um, we can see here, right? Country code USSR. And the reason that is because I'm destroying all of the all of the Axis entities right at mission begin. So these are unique entities like 109s, the Opel box truck, stuff like that the Lapino airfield wouldn't have. But if we captured that airfield, of course, right, the Axis team is going to bring their supplies to the airfield. So we wanted to simulate that to let the players know, like, hey, you own the airfield now. You have Axis entities at this airfield. But of course, at mission begin, they don't. So we destroy those objects at mission begin. Now, of course, we can do it this way, which is destroying them through logic, but we can also select all of our entities as well, and we can do an add damage level, and uh, these are all just planes and smaller entities, but sometimes you'll have like buildings that have multiple buildings tied to it, like your industrial buildings and stuff like that. So you really need to like add all the damage. Now, the reason I'm not doing it like this and I'm doing it through logic, so you can see here we have a damage, oops, it's set to minor, we need it to be to complete, sorry. So we have a damage complete. And the reason that is because some of those industry buildings I might miss, you know. Of course, I don't have it here, but I just want to make sure that yes, all of the unique entities are completely destroyed. I'm doing that through our our sorry, our damage report here, command damage. So, but the reason that they're allied, actually, let me go back to that. The reason that they're allied is because for whatever reason, and maybe I'm doing something wrong, which is very possible, but for whatever reason, whenever you use a command damage to destroy a block entity, and another player shoots this entity. So let's say an Axis player comes and starts shooting Lapino airfield that belongs to the Allies, and they accidentally hit a destroyed 109 entity that I destroyed at mission begin. Well, they would get, if this was an Axis entity, and not a Russian one that it is right now, they would get a friendly fire message. Um, so if I actually had it the correct way like this, they would, and this is destroyed because I destroyed it through our mission begin, they would get a friendly fire message because it's a German object. It's not a Russian object. So even though it's destroyed, which is kind of weird, if it's destroyed, it shouldn't give any messages in my opinion. But hey, whatever, right? So we're resolving that by putting everything as allied. And whenever we go and flip everything through this behavior MCU, we're flipping everything back to Axis. So even the allied entities that are destroyed, we're flipping those to Axis because what if an allied pilot comes by and starts shooting up the Axis Lapino airfield? Well, we don't want to give them friendly fire messages either. So it's just a way to solve the friendly fire message issues that could potentially happen with converting an airfield from one team to the other. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We're destroying all the entities here. I'm sorry, all the allied entities here. We're flipping every entity, universal, Axis, and allied to Axis to solve any friendly fire message issues. And then we're repairing only the universal entities and the Axis entities. And this happens on once we have enough paratroopers dropped. All right, so the last thing here is we have our flipping the airfield, the respawner airfield. So typically, when you make a plane, and I want to show you this, when we make a plane, it by default sets the index as 0, right? So it doesn't matter what plane I make. And of course, we can have unlimited or whatever the case may be, right? And we can set any of the other variables, and that plane is perfect. Now you'll notice though that my index number is 1. And the reason being, and I'm not 100% sure how this works for neutral airfields, but typically for an airfield that is not neutral, so if we change this to say, let's say Russian pilots will now only see this 190 because it's index 0. They will not see any of these index 1 planes. And that's the way arrays work, right? So this is part of an array, and we can add, we can have a bunch of these different 190s or whatever, right? And they can all be different planes. But the Allied team, because now it belongs to them, will only see these index 0 planes. On when the airfield is neutral, though, I believe, and again I could be wrong, that any index 0 planes don't get seen either, right? The airfield doesn't have any. So we're going to leave this, turn this back to neutral. Um, but when I flip the airfield to axis, I'm also setting the float parameters to 1, meaning that I'm changing our index value for our planes from 0 to 1. So now these set index 1 planes will be seen when the airfield gets changed to German through that behavior MCU. So now German pilots will be able to spawn in as in an F2 or a spaghetti plane or our Ju-87 Stuka, right? Cool stuff. So again, this is sort of like an advanced topic, sort of fluff, and makes it look really cool and shows off the ability to like what happens when the paratroopers capture the base. It's not necessarily needed, especially for like a multiplayer mission. This by itself, this little intermediate section, is definitely enough to say, hey, you know what? You drop paratroopers and you're good. If you have any questions or comments about what I presented here, and of course, you can download my missions through the thread on the IL2 forums. You can reverse engineer them, you can use them, you can do whatever you want with them. Um, and again, if you have any questions, by all means, just hit me up. Thanks again for watching, and you guys have a good day.